DNA testing can now prove exactly where a person comes from, yet the most powerful families on Earth show no interest in it. These royals spend millions documenting their history, but they stay completely silent when it came to genetic proof. What most people do not realize is that a full genetic map of European royalty might show markers from Central Asia or Siberia that do not match the official story. The silence around this topic is loud for a reason. There is a bloodline they do not want the world to know about. Forbidden lines. Standard history rarely questions the accepted records of the past, but a pattern of missing connections exists that changes everything. The official family trees of Europe present a line that never breaks. From father to son and mother to daughter, every marriage and alliance is supposed to be preserved. However, looking closer reveals transitions that happen too cleanly. These family trees look as if they were built backward from a conclusion that was already decided. A simple test is to look at any major royal tree from the 1700s or 1800s. Follow the lines of the mothers and grandmothers. It becomes clear that many of these women seem to appear out of nowhere before marrying into famous dynasties. The official explanation says these women came from small noble families or tiny German states that were too small to be on most maps. But the strangest part is that when trying to trace the history of these women back just 2 or 3 generations, the records become very thin. It is not that the papers are lost, they are just not there, as if their stories only started the moment they became useful to the royal narrative. During the 1700s, marriages that joined power across Europe were calculated to the smallest detail. Yet these brides appeared with very little proof of where they came from. They married into families that kept records of everything, but their own origins were never questioned. This brings up a major problem. If these royal houses cared so much about keeping their bloodlines pure, why would they accept brides whose past could not be proven? The only answer is that the past was hidden on purpose. In Russia, the Romanovs claimed to come from a clean line going back many centuries. But deep in the records, there are transitions that look like they were managed. There are whispers in academic circles about Tatar roots in several major Russian noble families. Not Mongolian, but Tatar. That word is a cousin to a name that history books try to avoid. That name is Tartary. Moving to the west, the British royal family had a similar change. The House of Hanover was brought in from German lands in 1714. The official story is that it was a legal move based on religion and distant family ties. But if a person looks at the small German states these royals came from, they find something odd. Many of these small areas had new families and new names show up just a generation or two before they were asked to provide kings for Britain. The evidence suggests a much larger plan than just a few accidents in the family tree. These gaps in the records might seem like they are just caused by time, but they happen too often at the exact same moments. The rise of these new houses matches perfectly with the disappearance of older powers in the East. It is almost as if a new history was being written to cover up an old one. This secret bloodline was not just about who sat on a throne, it was about where the power and the wealth of the world were being moved. When these women married into European houses, they brought more than just themselves. They brought a connection to a vast system that was being removed from the public eye. The silence about their true roots is the key to understanding how the modern world was actually formed. Truth be told, the people who were supposed to be the most documented in history have the most to hide. This leads directly to the structures they built to show off their new power. Shared foundations. The buildings these families constructed tell a story that the written records try to hide. In St. Petersburg, the Winter Palace stands as a massive monument of power. In London, Buckingham Palace went through huge changes. Vienna has the vast expansions of the Schönbrunn Palace, and Madrid has a royal palace built after a fire in 1734 conveniently destroyed the old records and the previous home. All these buildings share more than just a style. They share exact technical details and building methods. The proportions and the math used to design them are the same across thousands of miles. These palaces were built in cultures that were supposed to be rivals with very little contact. Yet they used the same decorative mathematics and spacing for their windows and halls. The official story says this is just because of a style called the Baroque or Neoclassical Revival. But that does not explain why the math is identical. When a person tries to find out where the architects trained, the trail usually goes cold right at the most important parts. The knowledge of how to build at such a huge scale with such exactness seems to have been passed down in secret. In the 1700s, building a palace that covered hundreds of thousands of square feet was a massive task. It required advanced knowledge of how to move weight and how to cut stone with perfect precision. If these empires were truly separate, their building styles and methods should have varied much more than they did. Instead, it looks like a single group of builders was working for all of them. These builders were using a language of power that belonged to an older civilization. Wait until the details of the interiors are examined. The heating systems, the plumbing, and the way the rooms were laid out follow a logic that existed before these dynasties took over. Some people suggest that these palaces were not even built by the royals who claimed them, but were instead fixed up and changed. This would explain why they all look so similar and why the construction records are so hard to find. It is much easier to take over a building and put a new name on it than to build it from scratch. Essentially, these buildings are the physical proof of a shared heritage. They are like a uniform that the elite wore to show they belonged to the same group. This group was not just European, it was global. The mathematical systems used in these palaces can also be found in buildings as far away as Asia and the Americas. This points to a worldwide network of power that was operating long before the modern age. The royal families were the faces of this network, and their palaces were the hubs where they managed their control. As the old world was erased, these buildings were the only things left behind to show what had once been there. This erasure was not just about buildings, but about the very maps of the earth. Map lies. Maps are some of the most honest records because they show what people actually knew and where they traveled. When looking at maps of Asia from the 1600s and 1700s, a massive territory is always there. It is labeled as Tartary or Grand Tartaria. This was not a small area. It was an enormous land that stretched from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Pacific Ocean and from the cold parts of Siberia down to the borders of China. French, Dutch, and British maps all show it with great detail. These were not just guesses. They were maps used for trade and moving armies. On these maps, there are symbols for large cities, busy trade routes, and royal courts. This suggests that Tartary was an organized society with a real government, not just a place where people wandered around with no home. But during the late 1700s and early 1800s, the maps changed fast. Tartary started to break apart. The western part became Russia, the eastern part became China, and the middle part seemed to lose its name entirely. The giant empire simply vanished from the documents. The official story is that Tartary was just a general name Europeans used for a place they did not know well. But this does not make sense. The same people who could map the coast of Africa and South America with perfect exactness would not suddenly become confused about the largest landmass on Earth. They drew borders and marked cities because those things were actually there. The disappearance of these cities and governments from history books is a major red flag. If an empire that big fell, there should be records of wars, treaties, and people running away. Rome took hundreds of years to fall, and every bit of it was written down. But with Tartary, there is mostly just silence. New royal families showed up and claimed the land, and the old maps were replaced with new ones that showed the current borders. It is as if a giant piece of the world was deleted and the remaining players divided the spoils. This erasure happened at the same time the new royal bloodlines were being established in Europe. It is a very strange coincidence. The maps show a world that was once connected by a massive power in the center of Asia. When that power fell, the people who took over needed to make sure no one remembered what was there before. They changed the names of the lands and the names of the people. They burned the old maps and drew new ones. But the ghost of Tartary still hides in the archives for anyone who knows where to look. This erasure of the land leads to the most personal part of the secret, which is the physical blood itself. Final proof. The most modern way to prove a family line is through DNA, but this is the one thing royal families seem to avoid at all costs. They are obsessed with their history, yet they show no care for genetic testing. While small studies have been done, there has never been a full mapping of the royal bloodlines. If these families were truly as pure as they claim, they would want to show it off with science. The fact that they do not suggests they already know what the results would be. DNA testing on regular people has shown that bloodlines are a mix of many different groups. If the royals were tested, markers from Central Asia or Siberia might show up. These markers would link them directly to the people of Tartary. It would prove that the different royal houses of Europe are not separate families at all, but branches of an older Eastern power. This would destroy the story of their divine right to rule based on European descent. While the DNA stays hidden, the written records have a habit of burning. Between 1650 and 1850, a huge number of major fires destroyed royal homes and government records. The fire in Madrid in 1734, the burning of the Library of Congress in 1814, and many others in Germany and Russia wiped out land titles and family trees. These fires often happened at the most convenient times, right when a new dynasty was taking over or when a territory was being renamed. After these records were lost to the flames, new documents were created that supported the new rulers. The old Tatar connections were replaced with clean European histories. It is a pattern that repeats with unsettling exactness across the globe. When a fire destroys the only proof of the past, the person who writes the new records gets to decide what history becomes. Even in Siberia, the story does not fit. When Russia expanded into the area in the 1700s, the records talk about finding cities made of stone and organized groups of people. But modern history says Siberia was an empty wilderness. Where did those cities go? It is the same silence that follows the DNA questions and the map changes. The evidence is being hidden in plain sight through fires and a lack of interest in science. So the question is how this secret was kept for so long. It required a massive effort to change the maps, burn the books, and keep the families quiet. But once a person sees the identical palaces and the gaps in the family trees, the secret becomes visible. History is not just what happened, it is what the people in charge want everyone to believe. The true bloodline of the world might be much older and much more connected than any textbook allows. This investigation is just the start of finding the truth that has been hidden for centuries. Is the history of the world just a story the winners agreed on? Are these royal families truly who they claim to be? Comment your thoughts, like, and subscribe for more.